The arrest warrants are for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed from at least October 8, 2023, until the request for the arrest warrants was issued by the prosecutor 6 months ago on May the 20th.
Big news today coming out of the International Criminal Court. In fact, the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former defense minister Yoav Gallant, as well as Hamas military commander Mohammed Deif. Now, for Deif, the court essentially found reasonable grounds to believe that he was responsible for the crimes against humanity of murder, extermination, torture, and rape, and other forms of sexual violence, as well as the war crimes of murder, cruel treatment, torture, taking hostages, outrages upon personal dignity, and rape and other form of sexual violence. Of course, this is tied to the atrocities that were committed by Hamas in Israel on October 7th. Now, Israel believes that Deif is already dead, but the ICC says that it is not in a position to determine if that is true. And as for the Israeli side of this, as for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, who, by the way, has been replaced as defense minister earlier this month, the chamber found reasonable grounds to believe that they each bear criminal responsibility for the following crimes as co-perpetrators for committing the acts jointly with others. The war crime of starvation as a method of warfare, as we know that they hadn't been allowing humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. It also found reasonable grounds to believe that each bear criminal responsibility as civilian superiors for the war crime of intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population in Gaza. In fact, just today it was reported that Israeli airstrikes in northern and central Gaza killed at least 87 people. The death toll is expected to rise, but here's what we know so far. At least 65 people were killed in northern Gaza overnight. The death toll again is expected to rise because there were about 200 people at the site of these airstrikes, which was Bet Lahia. Civilians were being dug out of the rubble with bare hands because there's nothing left in Gaza. There's no ambulances, there are no relief workers, there's no one to rescue people. So you have, doctors, anyone who's around literally trying to get human bodies out of the rubble using their bare hands. So there was a separate airstrike, Israeli airstrike in central Gaza that killed an additional 22 people. 10 of them were children. And the US, by the way, just vetoed yet another Security Council vote in the UN in favor of a ceasefire. All it takes is the United States to veto that vote, and that's what they did again. And while Israel does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, its 124 member countries do. So should any of these three individuals travel to an ICC member country, well, that country has an obligation to arrest these individuals. That is their obligation as a member state to the ICC. Now, I'm gonna get to all of the statements and denials in just a minute, but before I do, what are your thoughts, Cenk?
Yeah, so it's a great development because at least it's a tiny bit of justice and at least it hounds them a little bit throughout their lives. And so you think, well, really, I mean, they're not gonna escape justice, of course. Nobody's gonna actually arrest them. Not exactly. So Italy and the Netherlands have already said they step foot on this soil and they will be arrested. That is a legitimate warrant from a legitimate court that we recognize. And we signed a treaty to abide by the International Criminal Court. You come to anywhere in Italy or Netherlands and Benjamin Netanyahu, you're gonna find yourself behind bars. Basically, he's a fugitive from justice for the great number of countries. In fact, the great majority of countries in the world, even the UK, they asked them, well, would you arrest Netanyahu if he came to the UK? And they punted. I expect them to go, no, this is an outrageous decision. It's anti-Semitic, blah, 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 right? Like America does, like the sad puppets in America who are like, oh, okay, yeah, it's all anti-Semitism. I don't see the 44,000 dead people lying right there. So anyway, but the UK didn't clearly answer. So they're not sure that they could even go to the UK, let alone any other country. So they're, in a sense, you know how the Palestinian people are, in a sense, prisoners because they don't control their borders. They're in open air camps and they're at the mercy of Israel in West Bank and Gaza. Well, now, Netanyahu and Gallant are prisoners within Israel because if they go to most of the other countries in the world, they will be arrested as war criminals, which they obviously are. So I want to give a tip of the hat again here to Bernie Sanders because I want to talk about this because it's important and related, and point out how awful a person Joe Biden is.
Yes.
So Joe Biden said about 30 days ago, before the election, if Israel does not allow more humanitarian aid into northern Gaza, we will start to cut off the weapons. Now, we told you here on the Young Turks that he was lying. Now, for a news show, that's a pretty bold thing to say, right? We're telling you ahead of time that the president of the United States is a liar and will definitely not do what he's saying. And of course, we were right. He's a liar, and he, after the 30 days were over, after the election's over and they lost the election, it was obviously a political gimmick by a longtime liar. And so he came out and was like, oh yeah, no, of course we're not gonna do that. We're gonna keep that weapons going. He hasn't killed enough Palestinians yet. So, and hey, congratulations, Joe, he killed another 87. You must be celebrating. You and Jill Biden must be just beside yourself. Yes, more Palestinians murdered, and we lied all along on behalf of Israel. Give me the money, give me the money. At least $11 million from AIPAC and other sources to Biden throughout his campaign. So now Bernie then proposed a resolution in the Senate and said, okay, well, let's cut the funding. You said we were gonna cut the funding.
He was specific though. No more offensive weapons to Israel. He didn't say anything about defensive weaponry, supplies for the Iron Dome or David Sling or anything like that. Defensive support will remain. Offensive weaponry, like the 2,000-pound bombs that they're dropping on residential buildings, we got to stop sending those over. Continue, Cenk.
Yeah, that's the bare minimum we can do. But again, guys, this is a great example of what, this is not about religion. Like Bernie at this point is the best fighter for the Palestinians, and he's Jewish, right? This is about governments and what they do. So the Israeli government is totally, utterly out of control. One more quick thing to back up what Anna was saying. Not only is there not a single ambulance left in northern Gaza, and there's nothing to excavate the rubble once the buildings are bombed. Civilian buildings are bombed. In one of the bombs, 25 people were killed. In the second one that Anna mentioned, 10 of them were children. And all they can do is try to move the giant slabs of concrete to see if it crushed the children's heads or if any of them are alive. And then they bring them to the hospital, but there's nothing they could do. At what hospital? In fact, 84% of the healthcare centers in Gaza have been destroyed. So don't tell me it's not a genocide and that you accidentally destroyed 84% of the health centers in Gaza. And so what Bernie did as he was speaking in the Senate was they had rotating pictures of starving children in northern Gaza because they won't allow the aid in, right? And he said, is this what we're doing? We're sending money and bombs to this government to starve these children and to kill them? He said, no, that should weigh very heavy on your conscience. So his beloved friend Joe Biden, of course, called out on this, but hey, and now one more piece of credit to Bernie. He got 19 senators to vote with him. Of course, all Democrats, all the Republicans were like, no, we're still #1 donor AIPAC, we love AIPAC, kill them all. That's all those sick, disgusting Republican senators.
All those wonderful pro-life senators, you know.
Yeah, and by the way, also the sick Democratic senators that voted with them, like Chuck Schumer, Jackie Rosen, etc., who were like, no, Israel hasn't killed enough. More bombs, more weapons, kill the Palestinians. So congratulations, you got what you wished for and you'll get a bigger genocide. And Chuck Schumer and all those guys and Joe Biden better shut his mouth and never say the phrase never again, okay?
Yep.
Because they mean never again for me. But for you, I got slaughter, genocide, and ethnic cleansing that I'm gonna force the American taxpayers to pay for. But to those 19 Democratic senators, thank you for having a conscience and some morality and some courage to defy one of the most powerful forces in American politics, AIPAC, which bribed the other 81 senators and bought them completely.
Now, the Israeli Prime Minister's office released a statement following notice of these arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will not give in to pressure. He will continue to pursue all the objectives that Israel set out to achieve in its just war against Hamas and the Iranian axis of evil.
Terror.
Yeah, axis of terror, yes. Axis of evil
They've
is
changed the word slightly.
I know.
From
that
the
was
Iraq war to
habit.
the Iran war,
Yeah.
which Netanyahu also pushed us into.
Yeah, did David Frum write that?
I don't know, but he's probably on MSNBC right now.
Probably. White House National Security spokesperson also said this: "We remain deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants." Rush to seek arrest warrants. This has been going on for over a year. Rush to seek arrest warrants. Okay. I mean, our government's a joke, guys. It's a joke. Okay, the Biden administration is a complete and utter joke. But let me continue. Rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision. No clarity on what those so-called process errors are. The United States has been clear that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over this matter. In coordination with partners, including Israel, we are discussing next steps. Except the ICC actually does have jurisdiction. It has jurisdiction over Gaza, it has jurisdiction over the occupied West Bank, and it's because the Palestinians requested it. And so as a result of the atrocities that they have faced at the hands of the Israeli government, the ICC has the ability to issue the arrest warrants that they have now issued. And again, if these individuals travel to any of the member states, 124 of them, and by the way, every country in the EU is a member state of the ICC, they have an obligation to arrest Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant. And so, or if he's alive, the Mohammed Deif, the Hamas combatant. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, look, you and I talk about the frustrations we feel when it comes to gaslighting. I think this story is the epitome of our government gaslighting and pretending as though the atrocities that are being committed by the IDF aren't actually happening, while simultaneously pointing to Russia and the atrocities that Russia is committing in Ukraine. Russia has killed a little over 11,000 civilians. Israel has killed 44,000 people in a tiny strip of land called the Gaza Strip. How are you going to point to one country and say atrocities and then point to another country where far more civilians have been slaughtered and say, no, there's nothing wrong, nothing to see here, let's move on.
But wait a minute, did China and Iran legally bribe all of our politicians?
No, they didn't. Maybe they should consider it.
Oh, that's why. And Bernie Sanders in his speech said, how are we gonna have any credibility when we call out the human rights abuses in China, Iran, Russia, and all these other places, and we say we're outraged by the invasion that Russia did on Ukraine and how many civilians they killed, and then say, yes, but we'd like to fund worse when Israel does it, our so-called ally. So thank you again to him for being honest. And last thing is, just last week I did a debate at UCLA about this exact issue, whether the ICC should issue these warrants. And we had a legal debate about it, and one of the ICC judges joined us in that debate, and he explained at the end that he was the one that said that the ICC earlier did not have jurisdiction over Israel, but when the Palestinians were allowed to join as a member to the General Assembly, it changed the laws and allowed them to have jurisdiction over the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And because of that change, he would now say that they were able to rule on this matter as a matter of jurisdiction. They do have it because those war crimes happened in those areas, and that's why the ICC had every right to issue an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant. And guys, if you care about Israel, it should break your heart that two of the worst war criminals we've ever had in our lifetime are Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister of Israel. That should be heartbreaking if you love Israel. And it's not because, as they said, of course, they released a statement saying, it's because the entire world is anti-Semitic. And if you guys love Jews, you would know that we had to kill all of those children and other people made us do it. Hey, don't bring Jews into this. Jews all across the world didn't sign on to your genocide, okay? You chose to do that. They're not the war criminals, you are, right? But if you love Israel, you gotta get rid of this guy because he is absolutely getting the world to hate you and see your country as
a terrorist state,
as a rogue terrorist nation that says we should get to be war criminals and get away with it. And that is a terrible place to be. Look, I know the system feels broken and it's hard to engage with the news right now, but it's not the time to tune out. That's just letting the system go unchecked and unchallenged. We need to know what Trump and the Republican Party are up to, and we need Democrats to understand how they even got here in the first place. That's why I'm working with Ground News. They're an independent app and website that allows you to see through mainstream media narratives and keep both sides in check. For every story, you can swipe to see which news sources are reporting on it, even independent ones left out of the mainstream media bubble, with visual breakdowns of their political bias, credibility, and who's funding the conversation. Compare coverage and reveal essential stories that the left and the right aren't discussing. Take a break from the chaos, but don't check out and let others shape your future. Demand transparency in the leaders who are supposed to serve you and the news to accurately inform you. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code to take advantage of Ground News' biggest sale of the year. You can save 50% on their top tier Vantage plan, which is what we use, and stay informed without getting overwhelmed by what's going to happen in the next 4 years, because we are the power behind democracy, not just bystanders in a rigged game.